Hello and welcome to the Legal Eagle. My guest this week is an Indian politician. He's an advocate in the Supreme Court. He's been Additional Advocate General in Rajasthan. He's also currently Additional Advocate General in Assam. I welcome on the show Mr. Nalin Kohli. Mr. Kohli, as I welcome you on the show, as I want to take you back to your formative years and ask you about your career milestones, I begin by introducing you as someone who's always walking on the corridors of the Supreme Court, someone who's currently the Additional Advocate General in Assam, but also wanting to ask you about your formative years, your career milestones. I know you've practiced at the NGT, at the Armed Forces Tribunal, appeared in several arbitrations, appeared before the ED. What have been those particular cases that have impacted you, and what have your formative years been like?
Well, that's a huge question, Rhythm, because you're really trying to ask me about a period spanning several decades. But thank you very much for having me on your show. If I look back, I've had, through my childhood, which is school and college, always been an active person in debates, drama, elocution, and therefore communication was an important part of my formative years. I also was involved in the media for a period of time. So I guess my communication skills continuously kept getting honed in. That really has helped me to a very large extent, both in the second part of my life, which is being involved in the political circle as someone who set up initially the media cell of the BJP and then went on to become one of its spokespersons, handling various campaigns, and on the other hand, practicing in court as an arguing counsel. And as you are aware, that's been an area that I focus my work as a litigating counsel, one who argues matters across, various forums, as you have so kindly put it out there. So if you'd ask me what are been exciting periods in my legal life in terms of as a counsel, I think every case is very, very interesting because each case has a story to tell. And each case has something in its story that is a challenge for us to bring across, hoping that we will get relief in whatever manner we plead before the concerned forum or before the concerned bench. But in terms of specific cases, in recent times, I would look back and say something that we did, and I argued against the monitoring committee, which had done a large number of sealings in Delhi through the decade of the 2000 and much beyond it. We were able to convince the Supreme Court, and my argument was that the monitoring committee had been created to seal residential properties being misused for commercial reasons. But the monitoring committee was never formed to seal residential properties being used for residential purposes, even if the construction was unauthorized. And the Honorable Supreme Court was pleased to accept that argument, and thereafter specifically came out with a direction to the monitoring committee that this was exceeding its jurisdiction.
Yes. Mr. Kohli, I also want to ask you about something that I've been particularly interested and curious about. You've been a primetime news anchor. In fact, you've anchored over 2,000 hours of broadcasting at various events. You also apparently produced and directed over 100 hours of television programs on art, culture, literature, even when there were special dignitaries, world leaders coming to India. I want to ask you about that experience, but I also want to ask you today, when you see freedom of speech, the way it's being curtailed by certain governments, and also how it's being treated in India, what would your thoughts on that freedom of speech for the media be?
Rhythm, that's of course an aspect that very few people now look back because it's so many years. I used to read the English news on Doordarshan. And that I'm talking of the 90s, when Doordarshan was really the primary channel for a long time, through the 80s and 90s, but for me in the 90s. And yes, I had a long stint with the media. But, that gave me, as I said, it taught me about communication and in understanding the value of communication. So for me in my political life, that was important because I was able to switch from one side of the screen to handling it from the other side, as someone working to set up the media cell. So I think that was a very, very useful experience. But your question in terms of law, in terms of freedom of speech and expression, and you've covered courts for a long time, Rhythm, you understand that my right to free speech is curtailed. My means all our rights to free speech under Article 19 are curtailed with reasonable restrictions. And most people don't realize that the Indian Constitution is that way unique. In the US Constitution, the First Amendment related to the Bill of Rights, which expanded the scope of freedom of speech and expression, individual rights, to the extent that anything and everything can be said. Whereas in India, the First Amendment follows, brought about within it restrictions on free speech, reasonable restrictions, and that's why you have, in that sense, even say the defamation law, which says the principle being that my right to free speech ends where your nose begins, because I cannot cross that threshold of causing harm to another person.
Absolutely. In fact, I also wanted to ask you, how are you looking at the new rules that are coming out, Mr. Kohli, to monitor social media?
Rhythm, every story or every act will have two aspects. Of course, people will feel very, very strongly about a certain aspect, and they are entitled to. That's the beauty of our Constitution. Someone who is against the rules has a full point of view, and they are entitled to have that point of view. On the other hand, those who stand with the rules are equally entitled to have their point of view in support of the rules. Because freedom of speech and expression is not a one-way street. It's a two-way street in which both sides have to be accommodated in recognizing their right to have their point of view. Now, in terms of the rules, personally, I'm going to desist from passing a comment because it's before the Honorable Supreme Court. But on the other hand, let's look at the need for it, that somewhere or the other, fake news or something that is not correct in fact, maybe not deliberately fake, but something that is sent out there could cause great damage to the social fabric and sometimes has even led to riots and situations that have resulted in the destruction of property and even the loss of life. So that also misuse can take place by those who use the media. It doesn't mean necessarily that the platform is bad, but those who are on the platform may take steps that are not in consonance with law or in consonance with the requirements of a civilized society.
Yes. Mr. Kohli, I also want to ask you something. We've often seen you in the corridors of the Supreme Court. We've also seen a certain lobby always try and destabilize the judiciary, trying to intimidate the judiciary and also trying to play havoc with lawyers. What would your message to the judiciary be? What would your message to the lawyers rather be, who are always trying to play this game nationally and internationally to cause disrepute to India and to our judiciary?
So, Rhythm, first of all, it's very, and that's my personal view, very difficult to be a judge. Many successful lawyers leave a practice which is very financially lucrative to then sit down and be part of the bench in their way of giving back to society. Those who join the service directly are committing themselves to serve the cause of justice without necessarily being excited about the prospects of having a higher income in private practice. Additionally, those who are on the bench are not supposed to address the media and are not expected either. They have to live restricted lives in terms of meeting people, in terms of speaking their mind, because after all, they have a very important role to play as part of the judicial process. So they are at a disadvantage if someone makes a comment at them because it's not easy for them to react back. You and I can react back almost instantly. We can also choose how we react back. We can also choose the form of reaction, which is not possible for a sitting judge. So therefore, to make any kind of personal comment against a sitting judge is unfortunate and not correct, unless it is backed by irrefutable facts and evidence. It can't be only based on apprehensions or likes or dislikes. That's one. The second point, Rhythm, is that a judgment will finally be in favor of something and against something. Those who are seeking a favorable order and get it are going to celebrate the judgment. But on the other hand, those who did not get a favorable order, they have a right to feel disappointed and even speak out about their views on the judgment. But to run down the judgment as a motivated judgment every time it is not in your favor, is that correct? I ask myself, then why should judgments or why should judges wish to pronounce judgments? We don't want pendency. The easiest thing is to hear matters and not pronounce judgments. Is that what we want? We want the judicial process to run, to be able to come out with judgments as fast as possible and ensure closure. And the Supreme Court is the final court where you can't appeal beyond it, and there has to be closure thereafter, unless, of course, it goes to the legislative function in the case of an act or a statute or something like that. So my view is that we all need to, as stakeholders of the judicial system, as lawyers or as officers of the court, do our bit to strengthen it and also have the responsibility to bear in mind that sometimes our words can cause disrepute, bring disrepute, cause harm to the institution that we are seeking to serve. And that, of course, is something that is an obligation, a responsibility for each one of us to reflect.
Yes, I completely agree with you when you actually, Mr. Kohli, started off by saying it is the judges on whom the onus is and it is the judges who are completely looked at here. So I completely agree with this viewpoint. I also want to ask you something that's been happening since last year when the hybrid system of functioning has begun, Mr. Kohli, in the courts of the country. Some say it's a silver lining. Do you believe the hybrid system is the way to go? Do you believe virtual is the way to go, e-courts is the way to go, or do you think it should be back to physical hearings in the courts of the country?
Rhythm, my personal view is that the middle path is always something that one should look at. Because when we go to the extreme sides, there will always be an imbalance to the point of view of the other. So, in terms of the middle path, my personal way of looking at it, and I'm sure others have also seen it in that way, it's not something exclusive, it's just each one of us sees things or likes to assess things in the manner that we deem fit, is that the middle path is where everyone's truth meets. It's not my truth is greater than yours or your truth is greater than mine. It's where our truth can function, and that's the same in any solution. So, in assessing whether that solution can work to a larger audience, we need to see the points of view of both the systems. In a pure physical court, as it was pre-pandemic, we had a problem that lawyers needed to be physically in a court, and if they had to be in another place, they would necessarily have to give it up, or it would lead to an adjournment. Second, lawyers from outstation were at a disadvantage to those who practiced where the matter was. Like the Honorable Supreme Court being in Delhi. So if a lawyer had to come who may have handled the case in the High Court of, say, Telangana or Kochi or Mumbai, the Bombay High Court or Calcutta High Court or even Manipur, that person is at a disadvantage compared to some of us who are in Delhi and practice more regularly. 3. It is a disadvantage to litigants in terms of them being forced to travel, and then the legal process on account of various factors does take time and may not end on a particular day. It may have multiple hearings. The advantage, of course, is that a physical court offers a great interaction and an opportunity to put your case across in a more natural manner, because we are used to speaking with people across the table or face to face, and that helps. Now, the virtual system on its side has helped overcome some of these challenges. Also, the cost of litigation comes down because you don't have to travel necessarily, and people like us sometimes on one particular day, I remember I appeared in Himachal Pradesh High Court, Delhi High Court, the Honorable Supreme Court and the NGT on the same day, sitting in my office. On another day, I appeared in the Honorable Supreme Court, the Delhi High Court, the Central Administrative Tribunal, and another forum sitting in my office, all four being in Delhi. So, of course, there are great advantages to that too. But then there's the issue of connectivity. Then there are issues about the software. Then there are the issues of standard operating procedures. Then there are the issues of court decorum and etiquette, which is quite defined when you're physically in the court. And we've had some humorous and some disturbing situations of how lawyers in the online thing forgot that the cameras were on, or they were seen in a non-presentable manner, or how they were addressing the court. So things like that also we've seen. So perhaps there is a need to study whether we can have both the options before calling it in favor of either physical versus only virtual. So there may be some benefit of finding a hybrid system in some cases, but that wisdom will have to be, that final decision will have to be after ascertaining the views of all the stakeholders.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree. Hybrid is possibly a silver lining that we should be looking at, Mr. Kohli. And my second last question is going to be political, because I have to tap in on the Indian politician, the politician in you. This is, of course, to do with the elections that are around the corner in several states, in particular in West Bengal, where we've just seen a huge controversy erupt with an injury that West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee has had. She's said there's a conspiracy behind this. She's also going to go to the Election Commission. What is the BJP stance on this?
Well, on a personal note, Rhythm, I just consider myself just another person. I happen to be in a political party, so I've never really seen myself purely as a politician. I'm a professional who's involved in politics. A lot of people don't realize that I spend a significant time of my time, because my profession is law in the courts. So, but yes, of course, I do wear a political hat, and I understand where you're coming from. And I also, because of that political hat, am supposed to answer questions that you or another colleague of yours would be seeking to ask questions on. With regard to Bengal or West Bengal, the elections, it's an important state election, as every election is for the BJP. The BJP there has come across and is recognized as the principal challenge to the Trinamool Congress. The Trinamool Congress virtually had a clean sweep and dominated the Bengal election, the Bengal political scenario, West Bengal's political scenario, until the BJP came up with such a massive number of seats, growth of seats in the Lok Sabha 2019. That came and established that the BJP, which had a vote share, was actually within striking distance of giving a credible challenge to Trinamool Congress and unseat her, Ms. Mamata Banerjee and her government, which seems to be what we believe very firmly. The Honorable Prime Minister is leading that campaign. The party is very, very positive about this election, as other elections in the country. And with the incident itself, your channel, other channels have shown enough third-party video footage that doesn't indicate primarily to a conspiracy. It appears to be an accident. However, Ms. Banerjee has been hurt. That is factual, because some kind of incident has happened, even if it was not a conspiracy that we are being blamed of, even if it's an accident of hitting against a pole or something like that. And we wish her a speedy recovery. The Honorable Election Commission has sought the details. The BJP is clear that if Ms. Banerjee and her government wish to take the assistance of a central agency, they are welcome to do so. Maybe we would also like the truth to come out. But to immediately say that the BJP is behind it would be not correct, and also a political act. We feel, unfortunately, is being politicized by the Trinamool Congress, because the BJP has been at the receiving end of violence. Our National President, Mr. J.P. Nadda's convoy was attacked, stoned, and those visuals are there for all to see. We've seen how BJP rallies were prevented. We've seen how BJP workers have been killed, over 100 of them. How BJP workers have been picked out, identified and assaulted. Women, men, young, old, all of them. So I think the situation there is one that is politically charged, and we believe that because the BJP is such a credible force and the people are clearly supporting the BJP in such large numbers, that the Trinamool Congress perhaps is disturbed and taken aback by the groundswell in favor of the BJP, what we are seeing at the Prime Minister's rally, other leaders' rallies. So maybe that is one of the cause that they are trying to create some kind of a situation to draw political mileage from this incident, though prima facie, nothing seems to indicate towards a conspiracy. It seems to be more in the nature of an accident. But we'll wait for the truth to come out in terms of whatever report if the honorable election comes out with it, we look forward to it at the earliest.
Yes. Yes. And Mr. Kohli, my last question, you're balancing your legal career, you're balancing politics. What are your personal hobbies? I'm aware you're fond of traveling. I'm also aware you've been trained in semi-classical Indian music. So what do you like to do in your free time?
Well, I personally think music is very, very enjoyable. Rhythm, you wouldn't know, but I haven't shared it with too many people either. But in college, I used to be part of a rock band. I used to sing rock music and I play the keyboards a little bit. So that was something I really enjoyed in college, and I did it in bits and pieces thereafter also, though it's been several years now, 5-6 years since I've really gone out and jammed with my friends or done anything on that. So yes, I do enjoy music. It's very, very dear to me in that sense. Listening to it as also being a part of that musical experience. In terms of, I'm not much of a sportsman, but I do enjoy my game of golf when I find the time for it. I think it's good to have a sport, and I encourage everyone should have some kind of sport if they can play it, whatever it is. I love eating out and trying different cuisines, but as we put on a few years, we need to be more circumspect about how much we eat and how often we eat out. So I think that's something that one has to do in moderation. Though yes, I do enjoy, even now, during my TV days, I used to even host a program called Psyche Ka Safar. So that was a food show, so that was very, very enjoyable. So I think maybe some traits of it have carried on further. But generally, I do enjoy meeting people, interacting with them, listening to newer points of view, and the others that I just mentioned.
Absolutely. Mr. Kohli, we wish you all the very best in your political career, and also hoping you continue to rise in your legal career. It's been extremely enjoyable to have you here on the Legal. Thank you for being with us. Viewers, see you next week.